This game by Efim Geller is taken from the book Mastering the Endgame by Shereshevsky and Slutsky. This book is really good at explaining typical pawn structures and different openings, and not just the endgame that results from those typical openings, but also the plans in the middle game and the general strategy of different popular openings. This game in particular shows how white can exploit the d5 weakness in the Sicilian defense in the Najdorf Variation, and it's one of the first few games where Geller showed the flaws of black's pawn structure. This move, queen to c7, is a relative inaccuracy. Usually in this line, black delays the queen move for a little bit, and in the meantime, on move 9, he would usually play bishop to e6 and not commit the queen just yet. This is one more inaccuracy that black makes in this opening, which wasn't too well explored at the time. By putting the knight on d7 now, he basically constrains himself to developing the bishop to b7, and in this structure the bishop is usually better off on e6, because then it would cover the c4 square and the f5 square much better, and then would allow, for example, for black to transfer the knight from d7 to b6 and then to c4. As it is in the game, the bishop ends up a little bit displaced. This move may be a bit hard to understand at first, but in this pawn structure the play is relatively slow, so it's common for both sides to gradually improve their pieces. With bishop to f1, for example, white opens up the second rank, so the queen may transfer to f2 on the next move, or maybe even the knight might want to retreat to e2, and then say play knight e2, g3 to f5. But for now it's just slightly improving the position of the bishop with bishop f1. This move is a slight mistake. After the exchanges on c5, white will be able to control the light squares quite well, and for example play the bishop to c4 or something like that. And in this variation, typically it's good for black to allow knight takes c5 and then follow up with d takes c5, only if he later is able to advance the pawns on the queen side. Here white's going to have a good control over those light squares, and the black pawns are basically going to be stuck on dark squares, leaving the light squares to be kind of weak. With this move, black is prevented from playing pawn to c4, because then the b6 pawn is going to fall. When the rooks come off the board, it's pretty hard for black to create counterplay, and the simplified position is going to be to white's advantage. He could have, however, tried to complicate matters with playing rook to d4, sacrificing the exchange, but activating his pieces and resolving some of the positional issues that he has. As it is in the game, the position becomes clearly favorable for white, and Geller convincingly shows how to convert that positional advantage that he has. So white occupies the important a2 g8 diagonal, and so far he was putting pressure on the b6 and c5 pawns. After bishop to c4, he's also going to be able to play queen e2 and attack the a6 pawn, so all of black's pawns are potentially going to be quite vulnerable on the queen side. So the position may appear to be almost symmetric, but the placement of pieces of white is much better. He controls all the important diagonals, and now he also controls the d-file, because black is tied up to the defense of the a6 pawn. If he plays pawn to a5, then of course the b5 square is going to be weakened very significantly. White continues to improve the position of all his pieces, including the king. The bishop gradually got transferred to g3, and from here it's attacking the e5 pawn. As black defends it, he's removing control over some other important squares. As soon as black moves his knight away, immediately white invades on d5 square. Here white could win the pawn with knight to b6, knight takes b6, queen d6, check. But then black would probably be able to activate his pieces with queen to d7, so white just completely avoids any complications and just instead continues to improve the position of his pieces. With this, white shows that not only the d5 square is a weakness in black's position, but the other light squares are also potentially a target. So now the knight got transferred to f5, and from here it can help to attack the king. White completely activated all his pieces, and now he begins to basically collect the material. If black takes the bishop, then queen to c4 is going to decide the game. And again, there's no time to win the piece, because if black takes on h4, white's probably going to move the bishop away from f7 and give checkmate on f7 with the queen. So white has won the pawn, all his pieces are still very well placed, and the game ends pretty soon from here. So now the plan that white began in the opening of attacking the black pawn chain on the queen side, now it comes to logical conclusion as black is unable to hold the b5 and c5 pawns. So white is up 3 pawns, black's pieces are completely scattered throughout the board, the king is weak, so black naturally resigned. This was also move 40, so any time trouble that was possibly happening is now also kind of behind. So the game shows a typical example of how to gradually build up the pressure, exploit opponent's weaknesses in the center on the light squares, and slowly to build up the initiative. Also one of the trademark games of Geller, who was one of the first players to show the typical plans for white in this pawn structure in this line of the Sicilian defense.